Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Marjolein Groot. Marjolein is the CEO and publisher of Multilingual, a magazine that covers a wide range of topics related to the language industry. It includes localization, linguistics, language access, international marketing, AI, which is obviously on everybody's agenda at the moment, technology, global news, and everything in between. So it really does make it this valuable resource for professionals and individuals interested in everything related to multilingual type areas and issues. Marjolein is in charge of an international, I suppose, relatively young team working closely with the board of directors and determines the strategy and assures the delivery of what could be described as wildly important goals by heading operations using design thinking type approach, switching from that sort of top down to bottom up business offerings and distinguishing opportunities and aggressively, if I could use that term, exploring new avenues for growth for the multilingual empire. So Marjolein, it's a pleasure to have you here on VistaTalks.
I should, if it's an empire, I should call myself the emperor of multilingual media. I like that better than CEO, really.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you. We just got the newest issue in, so December. We're now working on January, and yeah, we're keeping going with a monthly publication next year as well.
Fantastic. Well, look, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Because I know some people know your background and obviously know you well, but there are other people maybe listening to us from our international audience that maybe just be helpful to give people a little bit of context in terms of how you came to be in the magazine publishing business.
Yeah, I like that question because especially when you're supposed to be a public figure, then you kind of formulate, what parts of yourself that you show, and then there's always a part that you hide, and it always feels like there's a mask to take off, which I really like about in-person events, and you get to know people there, more in person. But instead of just kind of going through my career, which is it's not that language related really until I walked into multilingual and I moved to the US, but I'm just I'm a nomad. I like to travel. I like to go to different places, and not in the way of what I've come to call the banana pancake trail. And and I call it that the beaten path, and I call it that because in Central America, South America, where I spent about 3 years, there was a set route for travelers, for backpackers, right? And you put your backpack on, you get cute beads in your hair, and you go from hostel to hostel, and there's always breakfast, and there's always banana pancakes with Nutella or something cheesy like that. And so as soon as you get off of that beaten track and you go to like a local hospedaje, and all you can get is like, chicken soup for breakfast, then you're off the banana pancake trail. So that's the kind of traveling I like to do. And when I get to be away from the office, away from running multilingual media, I will religiously spend most of my time outside camping, doing other wild things.
Very good, very good. And tell us a little bit about the mission then. So obviously multilingual media, it's changed quite a bit. You're obviously running the show there as the CEO, publisher. But if somebody was to sort of, stop you at a conference, or, you're in an elevator with somebody and they said, look, what's the mission? What's the vision? What are you trying to do with multilingual media now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What would you say?
Really gather all of the information in all of the media types, right? Not just written. Gather all of the information, the knowledge, encouraging people that have knowledge to share it, people that are shy about sharing it to kind of, talk to them and suggest, hey, you do have something really valuable to give because of the experiences that you have. Don't worry so much about, for example, English is your second language. We have a team of editors and we'll make it look really good. So people don't have to worry about the production side. So yeah, through, accessing a massive network to pick out those people and invite them and encourage them to share their ideas so that we can grow as an industry as a whole. We can all move forward when we share those thoughts on a big platform like Multilingual Media.
Yeah, for sure. And it's obviously changed since its original conception, since it was, the idea was first formulated. It's obviously changed ownership. But what have been some of the key changes to Multilingual, not just from the magazine, but maybe from the other areas too that now form part of Multilingual Media?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. And just as a brief history, it started as a buyer's guide in 1987. And it started in Sandpoint here in North Idaho, which is where we're headquartered now still. And it was just an entrepreneurial guy who happened to be the first person that I met when I moved to Sandpoint 8 years ago, completely by chance. And then I ended up at Multilingual by chance through another friend, not even through him. Anyway, he started it as a buyer's guide, basically the yellow pages of the language industry. So you could find technology tools. Back then there was like multi-language keyboards. The hardware was really specific. And then a magazine emerged in the early 90s. And that's about when Donna Parrish took over, and she ran it for 22 years. And she, of course, started Lookworld as well. And the buyer's guide was moved into a separate issue called the resource directory. And then that was moved online just because people search for that kind of information online. The magazine was massively popular as a technology focused magazine throughout the 90s. It was heavy on like code. There was these really, super techie, nerdy, and for most people, really dull, articles, but they were important to be shared. That became less important because, again, you can find that online more and more throughout the 2000s, et cetera. So, magazine publishing as a whole industry had a hard time in the later 2000s, and Multilingual as well. Changes were made to content. Lookworld was added to the mix. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, the magazine went out of print. It was the first time it went out of print. It was very sad. And advertisers such as, I have to say, VistaTalks has been one of the longest supporters and advertisers in the magazine. It was hard to then, to convince people of a value if we didn't, a special value, if we didn't have a print magazine anymore, because it is very unique in that way and how people interact with it. So then we realized something needed to change. And I was given the opportunity to spearhead it into the next iteration, if you will. We did some online events, but that space is really quite crowded. Our YouTube channel, though, is doing really well. We have some steady content there, podcast, and the website. We really, updated the website. We updated the content in the magazine. It's a lot more about culture. It's a lot more about ideas, sharing ideas. It's a lot more about the philosophy, if you will, of the language industry and localization, while still offering those super tech heavy articles. So the other media, as I see it, are really only there to support what we are still doing with the flagship product, which is the magazine.
Oh, that's great. And thanks for sharing that, Marjolein. And it brings me on to something else that I wanted to ask you, which is around the physical print media, if you like, or the flagship sort of part of what you're doing there. Because we've heard, haven't we, for many, many years, I don't know how many years now, but a long time, that print media is dying or it's dead. And we hear it from newspapers going out of business, and we hear magazines that don't make the shelves anymore. Yeah. And even this title hit a little bump in the road during its journey, as you described. But obviously, you're persevering with the print media, and there is something quite magical about receiving a physical glossy magazine. Still something quite wonderful about that. But I'm just wondering, it's not an easy journey to produce a high quality publication, to get it designed, to get it printed, and also to get it shipped around the world is certainly an expensive business. And you probably know that better than anybody. So is there a recipe for success when you're looking at printed over digital? Is there something that you must be doing, or is it just down to the economics? We've got to have X amount of subscribers and advertisers, otherwise this thing doesn't make any money. Because it isn't easy, is it, running a print business?
It's not. It's not easy at all. And I'll start with a couple questions for you. Where do you receive the magazine?
Yeah, so we were, I suppose, pre-pandemic, we would have received a lot into the office, and people would have had various copies of it. And again, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic now, we find them at conferences too, so that would be another area. But we also find it, a lot of people do read it online now as well. And some people now get it shipped to their home. So,
Exactly.
I think there's a mix there now, whereas before it would have traditionally probably been dropped onto your desk in the office or come in through the mail in
Right.
the office. Then it changed to sort of in home. And now I think, well, I'm only speaking from our own experience here, but I think it's a mixture of people that look forward to whether it's receiving the newsletter, receiving the magazine, being able to view it online, and also to have a copy of the print magazine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that's kind of the trick that, where you receive it at home. So when you ask about the success of something like a print medium, a magazine, you reach most people at home when they're calm and relaxed and they engage with everything way more positively, mostly than at work, and just with less time pressure, right? So they can spend more time looking at things and interpreting it, and they have a positive mindset. Then there's also a trend right now that returns us to take time off from screens. In Europe, there's a push to have laws in place for the right to disconnect. I believe it's already in place in Belgium. So the right to disconnect means you don't have to be available on your phone, on your computer, on your email. And that right to disconnect, people are re-establishing times in their days where they interact with things that are more physical. And one of those things is magazines. I pulled up a quote here. Ezra Klein, I heard him on a podcast recently. He's co-founder of Vox.com, which is completely focused on bringing news into video format to people, right? And he says, the thing I'm trying to spend more time reading right now is magazines. I really love magazines. And he captures this sentiment. I love them in print. I love New York Magazine. What an amazing product. I like a bunch of weird journals. So he's talking about like niche specific journals. I think magazines are evolved of a neglected technology, and they're typically better in print. They're well curated. So just subscribe to a bunch more and get them at my house. And this is the thing about magazines. And a lot of people, for example, young people, they're collecting records. They're going back to having cassette players. It's this whole nostalgia for a life that we knew before, and the young people, they heard of, and it just sounds and feels better and more satisfying. So magazines are on the rise. But it is true that it is challenging. We ship to 100 countries in the world. The physical magazine alone, the digital magazine goes even farther. And there's a lot of costs associated with it. There's a lot of logistics associated with it. There's a lot of customer support. People say, well, we didn't get it. And I'm like, well, where do you live? Well, we live on an island in the South Pacific, and you're the only subscriber. And we always try to find a way to bring it to them. So we have a really loyal reader base. And it's worth it. But yeah, it is a challenge. And it means that you have to create a really passionate team. And people who study magazine design, they're passionate about magazines, and editors are passionate about seeing things in print. And in this world where you can go online and you can find all the information that's in the magazine, including our magazine content. But when you search something and you see 1.5 million results, you don't know which one is really the most important, the most interesting, and the most true. And that is where that curation plays a really big part in adding value to a print publication. And when people refer to a success in their lives, oftentimes when they can point at a publication in a magazine, or being mentioned in a magazine, or being rated in a magazine, or being on the magazine cover, that means so much more than, a blog post, or, a mention on a website, or even a podcast. So there's still that value when people talk about magazines.
No, I totally agree. Thank you for sharing that. And it reminds me, I was talking to Condé Nast a few times during the pandemic, and incredibly, I think the Condé Nast Traveler, just to come back to, some of your love of the nomadic traveling lifestyle. But their revenues, their magazine just continued to grow and grow and grow. And okay, there was a bit of escapism, I'm sure, built into that. But it is something that when you find that right community and people buy into the brand and they appreciate maybe the curation that goes into it from the editorial team, and then it resonates, obviously, it's covering the right topics. And I do see, as I'm sure you do, as somebody who's in this business full time, there are some magazines that maybe don't come out every month or as frequent as, say, your magazine, but they maybe have a very high cover price, but they have a community behind it. And you sort of touched on that a little bit, whether it's collecting vinyl records or something else. People do like to invest in great content still. So it is encouraging to see that. So long may that continue, Marjolein.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is about the type of topics that you get into, because I'm sure they are, hard fought over at your internal meetings in terms of what you're going to cover. And I know you have a calendar and an editorial calendar and an advertiser's calendar. But ultimately, I'm thinking of things like AI that we mentioned earlier. Like the whole world seems to be talking about AI, and of course, the language industry is talking about AI. But are there any topics in particular that you think over the last 12 months were of really big importance, or is there anything you're looking forward in 2024 that you think you have to cover?
Well, the topics calendar is a really interesting thing in deciding what we're going to chase or what we're going to include in terms of topics. It's changed so much over the last 3 years. It's one of the main changes that we made to strategy. We are not as a media company, we're not as free anymore to determine and to choose what topics we're going to cover, simply because even without us, whatever is important is going to get attention online. People have constant access to each other and access to new information. So we have had to become way more responsive to that. We can definitely predict some of it, but we have to maintain flexibility in terms of what we cover, right? You can say, hey, we're going to cover life sciences in May, but maybe a big breakthrough happens in March and we need to be ready to respond to that. And as far as topics over the last couple of years, when I have been, part of that decision making, of course, AI is super important. But what is taking maybe a second place in that is going through as much of a, boost right now, as much of a change, workflow organization, TMSs, how that works, whether you organize a localization process in an enterprise or whether you, get a vendor involved, customized tools and products, completely customized. For example, the one that translated with Airbnb is a fascinating use case. So it's customization. ChatGPT is big, but honestly, it's big, but it's not all that we're going to cover, and it's not all we covered this year. Then geopolitics, and then things that we're just passionate about ourselves and that we know are going to resonate with readers that go beyond just like the tech or the language industry itself. So articles on games localization, articles that just explain a little bit more than what someone who would be first introduced to localization, and then that they can understand, and it goes just a little bit further than that. So you kind of pull them in. You try to make people aware, people that are the end users of all of this industry that we're in, people that have that interface, to explain it to them, how that all comes about. Because for them, it's just, behind black curtains, and they have no idea, and there's no reason for it to be that way. So what we want to do, that's the most intentional thing, I think, that that we try to do with the magazine, is to include those kinds of stories that make it more accessible to regular people.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you raised, because I did want to ask you about that, because people that have been around the language industry for decades, very knowledgeable localization people that have a very, deep knowledge, can get really technical.
Yeah.
And then you've got other people maybe who are, we were talking before we started recording, people that maybe didn't come from that background and then ended up in the industry. And as you say, it's almost behind the curtains, and you kind of need to almost, in inverted commas, translate that information back into a story that can be told through the print medium. And do you often find yourselves in those kind of discussions and debates about whether you're in the right zone? Is it too technical? Is it not technical enough? Is that a constant thought process with each edition,
No,
or not?
not really. We're truly pretty organic in that approach. We get articles in, we make a selection, and we start putting the thing together, and then maybe something last minute comes through that is more timely, and we push that forward, and then something else needs to go to the next issue. So that's the approach. It's very organic. It's very it's not as planned as you might think. What I like to come across is things that teach me something, and things that I can share with family that I know that they'll be able to understand. And a couple of months ago, we had an article about refugee support in the Netherlands specifically, which is where I'm from. And I started reading it, and I had no idea, and these are the kinds of stories that I love to include. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And look, as we come to sort of the end of our time together, I want to squeeze in a couple of quick questions if I can. The role of multilingual media and multilingual magazine, of course. How do you see the role for your business? How do you see its place in the future of this language industry that we're in, as you look forward maybe over the next 3-5 years out? Because we seem to be going through a period of change at the moment.
Well, I think that we stick with the success story, which is Multilingual magazine in print. And the only change is going to be its interface and its content, right? So we keep flowing with the demand and the, how knowledge grows, the evolution of the industry, and go with that.
That's great. And the last thing I wanted to ask you, Marjolein, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our worldwide audience while we have them here today? And secondly, if people want to find out more about the magazine or everything else that you do, where's the best web address to send them to?
A passion of mine that I would like to share, and that I try to include in what we do, is linguistic diversity and cultural understanding. And for people to be open, even if they don't speak someone else's language, be open to their different habits. Even if they speak the same language, be open to each other's different cultural backgrounds, different beliefs. We live in one world, and we need to protect it. And I don't want to get very political, but this is something that I'm very passionate about. And in our industry, we have a lot of people saying that they help people communicate across cultures, but at the same time, hold grudges when they don't understand someone or where they come from. So that's kind of what I would like to say to the larger audience. And I'm very easily reachable on LinkedIn. I have a very unique name, so it's easy to find me. And multilingual.com, that's the hub for everything. There's actually a merch shop. So if you wanted to give someone a funny present, there's a merch shop, and we have all sorts of cool stuff. The podcast, of course, keep an eye on it. It all starts at multilingual.com, which has been around since 1997. So also very easy to find.
Very, very good. Actually, the first year of VistaTech too, 97. Must have been a good year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, look, that brings us nicely to the end of the show with Marjolein Groot. It's been a real pleasure to catch up with Marjolein today. And to everybody who's been watching or listening to us around the world, make sure you tune into the next VistaTalks, where once again, we'll be catching up with some interesting people to discuss some interesting topics from all around the world. So thank you, Marjolein. It's been my pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you for what you do with the podcast.